I don't really talk about things like this, but I've been thinking about what happened for years, and lately I've been having trouble sleeping again. I guess I just need to put it out somewhere. People won't immediately tell me I imagined it. This was in winter 2016, when I was 26. I was doing freelance photography then, mostly nature and abandoned places. My girlfriend had just moved out, and I wanted a quiet break to reset my head and work on a portfolio project I've been planning for ages: winter landscapes, the kind that looked like they were taken on another planet. A friend of a friend told me about these cheap off-season cabins near a lake in northern Montana, barely maintained, but apparently beautiful. I called the park office and they said they had one available. No plumbing, generator for power, and the ranger checked in every few days. It sounded perfect. I packed my camera gear, a sleeping bag rated for sub-zero nights, and a week's worth of canned food. The drive up took longer than I thought. The last hour was all gravel road, nothing but pine trees and drifts of snow piled against the guardrails. My phone lost service around mile marker 32, which turned out to be the last sign I saw for days. The cabin was small, one room, wood stove in the corner, a narrow bed, and a single gas lamp on a hook. There was a generator out back that ran for a few hours on one tank. The first night I sat near the stove, listening to the metal pop from the heat, reading by lamplight. It felt peaceful. Days fell into a rhythm. I'd wake up around sunrise, make coffee with melted snow, hike out onto the frozen lake to take photos of the trees mirrored on the ice. The silence there was unreal. It's not like city silence. It's thick, like the snow eats sound before it travels. At night, I'd transfer photos onto my laptop and write notes by flashlight. My breath hung in the air constantly, even indoors. The smell of pine smoke clung to my clothes, and everything creaked. The floorboards, the window frames, even the stovepipe when the wind hit it right. The first weird thing happened on my third night. Around midnight, I heard a sound outside. 3 slow knocks. I thought maybe a tree branch had blown loose and was tapping the siding. It happened again an hour later, the same rhythm. When I stepped onto the porch with my flashlight, the beam caught nothing but swirling snow. The next morning I found footprints, faint like partial impressions in the powder, circling the cabin once, not leading away, not coming from anywhere, just a rough ring around the perimeter. I took a photo, half joking that maybe a coyote had walked laps in the night, but the prints looked human, barely defined, but longer than my boots. I rationalized it easily. Maybe an old print exposed by drifting snow, or maybe my own from unloading gear. Still, that night I pushed the table against the door just in case. On the fourth day, the weather turned. Thick gray sky, steady snowfall. I spent the morning indoors editing. That's when I noticed my tripod, the one I'd left folded by the door, was extended, one leg slightly adjusted. I don't even know why I noticed, just that it was off from how I left it. I told myself I must have bumped it. But when you're alone that far from people, every small detail feels amplified. The generator started to sputter that evening, so I turned it off early. I had this cheap shortwave radio for weather updates, one of those crank kinds that also runs on batteries. Sometimes I'd pick up static and faint stations from Canada. That night I was scrolling through the channels when I heard something through the static, a soft whisper that cut in mid-sentence. It said my first name. Just once, clear enough to recognize. Then it went back to white noise. I froze. My first thought was that someone nearby had a transceiver and was messing around, maybe a ranger or another camper. But when I checked the frequency display, it was blank, not even registering a signal. I sat there for a long time with the radio in my lap, listening to the hiss, until I couldn't tell if I was still hearing it or if it had become part of the silence outside. The snow started again that night, heavy, relentless. By 10 p.m., the wind was loud enough that I couldn't tell if something was knocking or just the branches scraping the roof. The temperature dropped fast. The windows frosted over from the inside. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. Crunching snow, stopping, then starting again. The cabin wasn't big, so I could hear each board creak under weight. I grabbed my flashlight and went still. The steps stopped right outside the door. I didn't breathe for a few seconds, just listened. Then, the faint sound of breathing. Close. Not through the door, through the window beside it. I turned the light toward the glass, but all I saw was frost. The outside was coated white, so thick you couldn't see through. But in the center of the frost, a shape began to appear, a dark blur pressed against it from the other side, as if someone leaned their forehead there. Then came a circle of condensation, spreading outward like breath. For maybe 10 seconds, I stared, waiting for it to move. I wanted to tell myself it was some thermal trick, heat escaping, whatever, but the circle pulsed, like with breathing. When I stepped closer, it stopped. I didn't open the door. I backed away, killed the lamp, and sat on the bed with my jacket still on. The footsteps didn't come back, but I heard faint shifting now and then, wood creaking where weight shouldn't be. At some point, I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, weak daylight was bleeding through the window. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything until I saw the glass. There were handprints on the outside. Not frost melted by heat, actual frozen outlines, as if something warm had pressed there long enough for moisture to refreeze in shape. 5 perfect fingers, splayed wide. I took a photo before I left, though I've never shown it to anyone. I packed in less than 20 minutes. I left half my gear, including the generator and food, and started driving back toward the highway. The first 30 miles, I didn't see a single car. When I finally reached service, I called the park office and told them I'd left early because of weather. The woman on the line said she'd let the ranger know. I didn't mention the handprints. A month later, I got a message from the same ranger who checked me in. He said he'd stopped by the cabin to make sure everything was fine and found it locked from the inside, lights off, generator still fueled. He thought maybe I had left through the window, except the snow around the place was completely smooth, no footprints at all. He asked if I'd maybe visited again to grab my stuff. I said no. I don't remember what else he said after that. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep unless every window in my apartment was covered. I kept catching my reflection in the glass and expecting to see something behind it, fogging up the surface from the outside. I still do winter shoots sometimes, but never alone, and never where there's frost thick enough to hold a breath. Every now and then, I'll be out somewhere cold, early morning, before sunrise, and I'll hear that same dull knocking, spaced just like it was that night. I always tell myself it's branches or maybe ice shifting. That's what makes sense. But deep down, I can still see that faint circle forming on the frozen glass right at the height of my face, like something remembering where I'd been standing. That's it. I don't know what I saw or if I saw anything at all, but it's been 9 years, and even now, when the temperature drops below freezing, I swear the air feels heavier, like it's waiting for me to breathe first. I'm not the kind of person who believes in paranormal stuff. I still don't, technically. But there's one night I can't explain, no matter how many times I try to rationalize it. It happened in December 2009, when I was 19, driving home from college for Christmas. My university was in upstate New York, and my family lived in western Pennsylvania. Normally, it was a 6-hour drive, boring but easy. That year, a snowstorm hit the interstate hard, so my GPS rerouted me through back roads. That's how I ended up on a road called Hollow Ridge Pass. I hadn't heard of it before that night, and I've never found it again since. I'd left campus later than planned, around 9 p.m. I was tired from finals and running mostly on gas station coffee. The storm had started earlier than forecast, thick, swirling snow that the headlights couldn't cut through. It felt like driving inside static. My car was a beat-up 2001 Civic with weak heat and windshield wipers that squeaked every pass. The radio was tuned low to keep me awake, but all I got was fuzz between stations. The air smelled like wet fabric and stale sugar from a spilled energy drink. I remember thinking how weirdly empty the world felt. No cars behind me, none ahead, just white road, white trees, white sky. The GPS told me to turn onto a road I didn't recognize. The sign was half buried in snow, but I could make out the letters, Hollow Ridge RD. It didn't look maintained. Narrow, tree-lined, no streetlights. But the map said it would reconnect with the highway after 20 miles. So I took it. Almost immediately, the snow seemed heavier, like the air was thicker there. The trees leaned closer, branches scraping the roof whenever I passed under them. My headlights only reached about 10 feet before everything turned into a swirling white blur. After maybe 15 minutes, I noticed something odd. A mailbox on the right side of the road, bent and half broken. The red flag was still up even though it was dark. I barely thought about it at the time. Then, 5 minutes later, I saw the same mailbox again. Same dent, same number, same angle. I thought I'd somehow loop back without realizing. Maybe I had made a turn or drifted onto a side road. I slowed down to check the GPS, but the screen showed no road at all, just a gray background, like the map had failed to load. The arrow representing my car was frozen in place. I told myself it was a glitch. Maybe the storm was blocking the signal. I kept driving, slower now. My hands were starting to ache from gripping the steering wheel. The radio cut in and out, and every few seconds I caught bits of voices, too faint to make out words, like overlapping whispers. I assumed I was picking up 2 a.m. stations colliding in the static. But one phrase came through clear enough that I remember it exactly. Keep left. Don't come through twice. The voice was calm, male, not robotic. I actually laughed. It sounded like something from a numbers station. I said out loud, "Yeah, sure, whatever," and turned the volume down. 10 minutes later, there was the mailbox again. I started to feel that creeping cold in my chest, not from the air, but from the realization that something wasn't adding up. I looked at the odometer. I'd driven another 6 miles. I couldn't possibly be in the same place. I thought about turning around, but the road was too narrow to U-turn without risking a ditch. So I just kept crawling forward, waiting for any kind of landmark. The snow reflected my headlights so completely it felt like daylight in a tunnel, endless and flat. Then I saw someone. A figure standing on the shoulder about 30 feet ahead. They weren't moving, just standing with their arms at their sides. They looked small, maybe 5.5 feet, wearing what looked like a light jacket, not nearly enough for that cold. I slowed down, rolled the window down an inch, and shouted something like, "Hey, you okay? You need a ride?" No reaction,
but I could swear that even though their head didn't move, I heard words. Inside my head, not through my ears. A quiet, neutral voice saying, "You already came through." And then silence. The person turned slightly toward the road, and I swear their face looked blurred, like a photograph that never finished developing. My brain kept trying to fill it in, but couldn't. I panicked and pressed the gas, inching past. As I did, the figure turned fully toward me. My headlights washed over them, or tried to. The snowflakes falling between us bent around their outline, like light avoiding a heat source. The air shimmered for a moment, and then the figure was gone. Not stepped away. Gone. My heart was pounding so hard I had to pull over. I sat there breathing into my hands until I realized how cold it had gotten in the car, colder than outside. My windows had fogged from the inside. I turned the key to start the engine again, and the radio burst into life. A sudden blast of static so loud I flinched. Buried under it, I heard that same phrase again. Keep left. Don't come through twice. I turned the wheel slightly left, even though there was no intersection, just instinct. A few seconds later, I saw faint headlights ahead. Moving. Another car, finally. When I blinked, the lights were gone. Eventually, after what felt like an hour, but must have been 10 minutes, the trees thinned and I hit a plowed intersection with a sign pointing towards Route 58. I stopped there, heart still hammering, and looked behind me. The road I'd come from wasn't on any map. The GPS suddenly refreshed, showing only 2 intersecting lines. No hollow ridge. When I reached the next town, I pulled into a diner parking lot to calm down. My hands were shaking too much to text. A guy in a snowplow parked nearby got out and asked if I was lost. I said I'd just come from Hollow Ridge. He gave me this blank look, then said, "You mean Hollow Ridge Pass? That road's been closed since '97, washed out halfway through. You couldn't have driven it." I didn't argue. I just sat there until the coffee cooled in front of me. For a long time, I thought it was fatigue. Maybe I had hallucinated from lack of sleep or mild hypothermia. But even now, I can still hear that voice sometimes when I'm driving in heavy snow. It's faint under the engine noise, like AM static whispering through the vents. A few years later, I tried to look up that road again. I found an old county map online. It listed a Hollow Ridge Pass, but it ended at a small river with a note, "Bridge collapsed, 1997, fatal accident." No names, no details. I don't know what I saw, but I'll tell you one more thing that still freaks me out. Every winter since then, whenever snow starts falling hard, my car's GPS randomly freezes for a few seconds. And sometimes when it comes back, the map shows a gray background. No road, just that same empty space. Once, out of curiosity, I zoomed in, and right where my location arrow sat, in faint gray letters barely visible against the map, it said, Hollow Ridge RD.
It was winter 2022, and I was 33. At the time, I worked for the Public Works Department of a small town in Maine, maintenance on water systems, dams, and reservoirs. Basically, check gauges, monitor flow, make sure pipes don't freeze and nothing collapses. Most of it was boring, until it wasn't. That winter was brutal. Weeks of sub-zero nights, the kind that turned breath into needles. I was assigned to the North Edge Reservoir, an old man-made lake surrounded by pine forest, about a mile from the nearest house. There was a small control shed near the dam, concrete, metal door, single electric heater that barely worked. My routine was simple. Get there by 6:30 a.m., check the pressure gauges and intake screens, clear snow from the turbine grates, log everything by hand because the computer system froze half the time. I'd usually bring a thermos of coffee and a portable radio just for company. That place had its own kind of silence. Not the kind peaceful. It was the hum and rattle kind, where machinery never really stops, but the sound doesn't feel alive. Inside the control shed, everything smelled metallic, cold oil, rust, damp concrete. The air always carried a faint vibration from the turbines below, like a heartbeat you could only feel through your boots. Outside, the reservoir stretched flat and white, frozen solid, except for a dark patch near the middle, where the outflow currents kept it thin. Some mornings I'd hear cracking noises, long, slow groans as the ice shifted. I used to tell new guys that ice can sound alive if you listen too long. Turns out I was more right than I wanted to be. The weird stuff started around January 10th. We'd had a warm day, followed by a hard freeze, which always messes with the pressure readings. I was logging numbers when I noticed that one of the gauges, the west line, kept flickering between normal pressure and zero. No leak alarms, no flow drop, just flickering. I went outside to check the vent pipes. The cold hit like a slap. Everything was dead quiet, except for the wind moving over the ice. Then I heard tapping. Soft, steady, rhythmic, like someone knocking on metal. At first I thought it was expansion noise from the frozen pipes, but it was coming from the direction of the reservoir itself, not the dam. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. Almost like Morse code, but too slow. I wrote it off as echo from cracking ice. Still, I marked the log. Unusual noise, likely stress shift. A few mornings later, I noticed footprints near the reservoir edge. Boot prints leading toward the thin ice zone. We were supposed to be the only ones with access. The gate lock was intact. The tracks ended right at the waterline, where the ice turned dark. No return prints. It was probably from a fisherman, I told myself. Someone sneaked in, realized it was unsafe, and turned back along their own tracks. Except they didn't. There were none leading back. I radioed it in. My supervisor just said, "Mark it and move on. Ice plays tricks on depth perception." So, I did. But that night, I dreamed of those prints. Fresh, clean, leading nowhere. The real event happened on January 17th, just before midnight. I was on call that week, which meant I had to respond to alerts even off hours. A sensor flag came in for pressure drop, so I drove up alone. Temperature was minus 22 degrees Celsius. Sky so clear it looked fake. The moonlight made the reservoir glow pale blue. When I got to the control shed, the gauges all read normal. No leaks, no drops, but the tapping had started again. It was louder now, echoing through the pipes, distinct, deliberate. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. I followed the sound outside. Standing near the edge, I felt the vibration under my boots. Then I noticed movement beneath the ice, a dark shape drifting slowly. At first I thought it was a log trapped under the surface, but Logs don't change direction like that. I knelt and aimed my flashlight down. The beam hit something pale under the ice. A face. At least, that's what it looked like. Human-shaped, eyes open, mouth wide as if mid-scream. Frozen, maybe a foot below the surface. But the part that froze me wasn't the face. It was the eyes. They moved. Just a fraction. Following the light. I jumped back, nearly slipping. For a second, everything went still. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A deep, hollow crack, like a gunshot underwater. The ice flexed, groaning. I ran for the shed, slammed the door, and killed the floodlights. Inside, the heater hummed weakly. The tapping had stopped. I sat there until sunrise, staring at the gauges. All readings were normal, except the west line, which now read 0.00. Completely flat. No fluctuation, no pressure pulse, nothing. Like something had closed it off. When my relief shift showed up, I didn't say much, just that the west line sensor was down. The next day, a team came out to check the pipe. They drilled core samples near where I'd seen the face. Nothing unusual, just ice, sediment, water. The guy running the sonar said the readings showed a void under that section, like a pocket. He joked that maybe it was the ghost of bad engineering. They patched it, reset the gauge, and left. Nobody found anything resembling a body. That night, I went home and opened the logbook. My entry from the night before, pressure 0, had been crossed out in red pen, initialed by a supervisor I'd never heard of. I didn't question it. By February, I'd transferred to street maintenance. Couldn't stand the sound of running water anymore. Every time a pipe clanged or air hissed through a valve, I'd freeze up. The new guy who took over my old route quit after 2 weeks. When I asked around, nobody knew why. He just stopped showing up. One of the older crew mentioned that back in the 80s, before the reservoir was expanded, there'd been a small settlement in that valley. Houses flooded out when they built the dam. People used to say that during certain winters, you could hear knocking from under the ice, like the old houses settling. I laughed it off, but not really. It's been 3 years now. I live inland, nowhere near lakes or rivers. But sometimes, when it's cold enough for frost to crawl up the windows, I hear that tapping again. Faint, like it's coming from inside the walls. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I tell myself it's pipes contracting, or maybe just memory. But every time I hear it, I can almost see that pale face beneath the ice, eyes following the light, mouth open like it's still trying to finish a sound. I never told anyone at work what I saw. Didn't want to end up in a report or psych eval. Still, whenever I pass frozen water, I can't help glancing down, not to see what's there, but to make sure nothing's looking up.